Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here because actually this was my very first talk I ever gave, was right in this venue. I did practice a little bit in between, so you're safe. So I'm Christine, and I run an online learning platform called Moo Learning. And how it works, it's a pretty standard platform where you sign in and then you can consume any sort of pre-recorded videos and Figma files. And what I focus on is this place where design and development meets. And usually when I say that, then people go like, oh, tell me about the handoff. I just want to know how to do this stuff, throw it over to development, and then I just want to call it a day. But I'm really sorry to disappoint you. I'm not a big fan. I don't even like the word, to be honest. I don't believe much in the handing off because I believe in the understanding of these things because these conversations need to happen. And what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about layouts between design and development, because we have different mental models, and a lot of the time the misunderstandings and the friction that happens, it's from these different mental models. And if we understand each other's tools, then it's going to really, really improve the way that we're working. So especially I'm going to focus around layout today. So what I want to do, I'm going to run through all of these. So it's Flexbox, CSS Grid, breakpoints, container queries, and then a little thing that I like playing with. It's a bit strange because now in this era of everything is vibe coding, and I still believe, however, that things happen in the browser is still staying here. So this is something that's very important, especially as a designer, to understand how these things come alive and to still control them. And I think this is very relevant. So it's not about one part or the other. I really want to try, whether you're a developer or whether you're a designer, that you understand the other part today. So I have this here. You don't need to scan it yet, so I have 30 minutes to prove myself to make it worth your while scanning it. The idea is that I'm going to scratch on all of these topics. So it's very deep, very big topics, and we're just going to look at the surface. So I put together some resources. It's all free. There's some free tutorials, some free articles. So if you have a subject that you enjoy, then you can go deeper over here. And the slides are there as well. So to make this a little lighter, we're going to take this like a story. So once upon a time, there was a designer. And this was a really good designer. How do you recognize a good designer? They're always dressed in black. It's very important. And they constantly doubt their own ability. This is very important. If you ever meet a designer that tells you they're a very good designer, lock your Figma file and run. Don't let them anywhere close it. So our designer was a good designer. Our designers knew there wasn't only the finished design. It was about thinking in components. It was about thinking in hierarchy, typography, variables, systems, spacing. There's some sort of rhythm, some sort of flow in our design. And once this was finished, our designer just had to press that share button. And this is where the story really starts, in the Slack channel. So hello, here is the link to the web design, which includes all the necessary information for coding. I'll be away for an extended weekend. Feel free to contact me anytime if you have questions. Developer typing. This is a very difficult moment in a designer's life. Okay, let's see. Great, I'll have a look and get going. That worked out well. Our designer is off to that weekend. Things are running smoothly here, right? Until hey, there are some problems with the design. You said to reach out any time. We obviously didn't mean that, but of course, I'm always really happy to chat. Just heads up, I'll be opting for a different layout approach. As the 12-column grid, that's pretty much outdated. OK, so what are we using instead? Just the usual CSS layout stuff, like Flexbox and so on. And now as a designer, you know, if you have two ways this could go. And I know you want to go for option A. You want to say, sure, just go for it. You know you're going to come back Monday to the office, cry over that design in the browser, and you have no idea why it just looks so weird. And you know deep down in your soul, you have to go for option B and say, I don't know what that means. But the problem is, as designers, we've been studying this, we're experts, we love our work, and it feels very strange when suddenly, to bring your work alive, you're faced with a completely different discipline that you don't understand. And it feels a bit like facing this. And you're like, they're thinking this. And maybe they do, but, so however, I also think you don't need to be an expert, and you need to be open, and it's fine to not know everything. And I think it's also flipping the switch in your head of how you see that and how you approach that. So if you stop seeing development like this scary thing in your dev team, like these experts that don't want to talk to you, just think of them instead of this. Just when you look at a developer, think of this, right? Very cute, fluffy dogs. Who's a developer in this room? Yeah, that's great. When I see you later for a coffee, I see you like that. That's really great. So, and then when they say, don't worry, do you want me to show you how this works on my side of the table? Then you say, yes, I would absolutely love that. And so this is usually where we bring in a skilled front-end developer to explain that, being your budgets are tight, economy, so I'm just going to explain that to you. So we're going to start with Flexbox. So what is Flexbox? So as a designer, we're used to moving stuff around the canvas very freely. And this is also, for me, the very important part why I still think we shouldn't jump in the browser right away, because we're so much, at this moment of time at least, so much faster still in this file, trying out stuff and exploring. But the thing is, once we move to the browser, things work differently. So they stack one below another. And we need to use some sort of tools in order to achieve that layout. And we also need to consider the responsiveness of the browser. So per default, if we have 3 items, it's A, B, and C. And then what we can do in order to organize them, if we use Flexbox, we have our container, and we call display flex. And now what happens is we can tell these items how to behave. And an important concept is to understand the parent and child relationship. So we have our parent, the container, and then all the children inside of this container, they're just going to follow all the rules that I set. So it's the same for all of them. So it's the alignment, vertical, horizontal, the space they use up, the padding, the distribution, and notice how all of them follow perfectly. It's like a perfect family. You set one rule, all the children just do it. But those children, they also have their freedom doing this. So within those set rules, what they can do is the flex items, they can choose how they use up the space that you're giving them. So this could be a percentage, this could be a fixed value, or this could be something called flex. So that means that you're using up the rest of the available space in that container. So if we're having something very simple like a card, then we have our Flexbox, and now you can see that everything is aligned the same way. The padding, the margins, everything is the same for all of these items, but they're taking up the space that they need in order to work. So if we're having something more complex, then what we do is we nest that. So we're having the child looking up to the parent, but that parent is the child of yet another parent. And those grandparents, they basically don't get involved with the grandchildren. So it's always looking up to your nearest parents where the rules are set. So you have Flexbox and Flexbox and Flexbox, and this is how you can create these designs. So it's all about understanding nesting. You could set up your components like this. You can you could group them to larger elements. You can create entire pages like this. And the beauty is that everything, because of the way that the children behave, responds nicely to a change in size. So our designer looked at this and said, this is super interesting. I just noticed something. Because when I work in Figma, then I have something called auto layout. And if I look into dev mode, then I see flex and flex start, but I didn't know what that means. So this is apparently translating to Flexbox. So the Figma menu has changed this year in May. During config, they launched the new auto layout menu. So we're going to look at this middle part, and that's the one-dimensional layout that sort of represents Flexbox. So we have our menu, and we have nesting, just as we saw in Flexbox. So let's look at the menu. So remember how it works with Flexbox, right? That we told all the children what to do. And if we look at the Figma menu, it does exactly that. Vertical or horizontal, how do you align, where do you want your items to be placed, adding a gap, adding padding, and all your children, they're all going to behave the same. Then we have our child items. Just as in Flexbox, in Figma, we have something similar. So we have fixed, we have something called fill the container, which is like flex, and then we have something called hug the container, which is pretty much a default setting. So fix, it's just a fixed value. And then we're having fill, so that would use up all of the rest of the available space. And then we have hug, so that's just the content and the padding you set, and it's literally giving it a little hug. It's like a very cute feature. There is some differences to be aware of, and this is the part where, when you're having a conversation with development, it's important also for development to understand why you're not doing certain things. So someone got very upset. I'm just using the short form for flex here. I'm really sorry. That's just a demonstration. So we don't have percentage. We have fill container, which is flex 1. We cannot have flex values other than 1 currently. If we go to the nesting, then this is usually where when people start using auto layout, things go wrong. You have your layout, you set it up all nicely, you press that auto layout button, and then everything just looks weird, and you're like, I don't know how to use this. And the reason is because what I showed you, because you need to respect the parent and child relationship. So if you're having the same layer, that's completely fine to start your idea, to get your ideas going. You don't need to start off with all auto layout. Once you're getting ready and you want a working component, then you need to run through this, and you need to understand the nesting. How do these things work? How do they relate to one another? Who sits in what? Which direction is happening? And once you've set all of this up, you're now adding auto layout and you're resizing, and then you're getting that perfect component that you're after. There is a little trick. So if you have it all on the same layer, you can right-click, and then you see here under layout options, suggest auto layout. So that's a smaller AI feature, and it's going to auto nest all for you. And it works pretty well. You can then also auto name all of the layers, and so you have auto layout set. I would still highly recommend that you play a little bit around with it, that you familiarize with this concept to understand it, but then you can speed it up with this little trick. So just as we saw before, we can create these entire pages just as we did with Flexbox, with a few limitations, which we then later need to discuss and see in the browser. Now we have a new person entering our little play here, which is the project manager. So here we go. The development did that lovely file, so attached a link to our website. And the project manager says, thanks, but why do these cards, why do they shuffle so strangely? Like, could we please fix this? This is a hard moment for the designer, because we just learned all of this stuff, and then we don't know what to do now because we can't do it with Flexbox. So we can now run back to development because we're friends, so that's always a good thing. When we say, development tells us, no worries, we just need some CSS Grid here. Flexbox is a one-dimensional layout tool, and we need 2 dimensions. I have absolutely no idea what you mean. So let's carry on here. CSS Grid, what does that do? So CSS Grid, our developer is going to run us through that. So first of all, when we look again at Flexbox, there is a thing called wrap. So you wrap it, and that means things go in the next line, which is what we saw with these cards shuffling. The thing is, notice how it's stacked. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't care what is happening. So it is a one-dimensional layout, and a one-dimensional layout doesn't care what's happening in that first line. It just places those items as they fit. If you want something like this, then you do need a 2-dimensional layout tool looking at both axes. So you have Flexbox and you have CSS Grid. Now, there isn't one better or one worse than the other. It depends what you're after. It depends the effect you need. And so you need to play with them to figure out at what moment you need what. So if you think about Flexbox being beads on a string, then CSS Grid, you're taking these beads off the string and you're placing them into a bento box. And it's a really cool bento box. So you can extend it, you can change the compartment, and it's very flexible. And this part here, if you're remembering one part of this talk, please let it be this one. When you say grid to a designer, they usually think of that. They think of columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, however many, and then placing items inside those. It's from a graphic design approach, it's from the way that we used to work, it's from the way that Figma used to work until now. But when you say grid to a developer, then that's a different thing. Then that is almost like a coordinate system. It's grid lines and not grid columns. They start with 1, and then they go on, and you can target them. So per default, if you just add your items, that's what they're going to look like. But what you can do is you can target those pockets, like on a chessboard almost. And then what you can also do, you can create these grid areas. You can make them overlap. You can change the columns so they don't have to have all the same size. And there is a new unit. There's a fractional unit. So as it says, it's a fraction of the whole. So you can mix and match again. So you have a fixed value, you have one fraction, and then you can mix that again with different amounts of fractions. And when you resize, they then keep the fraction of the given size. So that's very powerful. What I showed you and what makes a lot of sense to us designers is the explicit grid. So that means I'm thinking of a grid, and then I create that grid, and then I design inside of that grid. But the browser is more powerful, so you could do that, and a lot of the times that's what you do, but there's also something called an implicit grid. So to understand that, I still have problems understanding it. I really need to sit there and see it in the browser. It's a very strange concept for me as a designer to understand, because you literally just give those elements to the browser and it creates the grid for you, which is very powerful in a lot of situations. And so this would also be my call to stop fixing those designs and being so precious about your Figma file. It's where things evolve, is where you start. You do all of that work to work together, and then you have an extra power of the browser. So let that be used, because you're going to have a much better design if you stop fixing things and just start working together. If you say, I don't really need that, I want something like this, I'm happy just having the standard grid, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's a very good design element, you can do that, you can design like that, and under the hood it might be CSS Grid, you don't need to worry about it. But now you know that you can break out, so if you have a hero section or something, then you can really sort of open that up and you have all these possibilities. You can go completely wild, there's amazing examples. The great thing is that all of these change when you have a changing screen size, then all of them change really nicely. Sometimes it's a bit overwhelming almost when you start getting into this as a designer, because there's so many possibilities. So sometimes I just stick to a standard grid, and then whenever I see that I would want something extra, then I open this up. So now next question is always, so when do I use what? And the beauty is they're all the same family, they're all CSS, so they go really well hand in hand. So you could have your components in Flex and then place them into a grid. You could have a little bit of Flex, a little bit of CSS Grid, and what I also really love seeing these days more is that you have your components set up in CSS Grid. So there isn't a rule of what you do, it's like whatever goal you have with your design. The decision of what is like placed in CSS Grid or in Flexbox, that's nothing that you're going to do in your Figma file. That's really something that's going to happen that the developers are going to take care of. So our designer looked at this again and said, okay, so till now I didn't have anything like this. So I literally just could not communicate it. So all I had was this, and a lot of old files, they will just use this still. But this May, Figma launched a new grid. So this is this last little part in the new menu. And it's still in beta, and it's still a bit tricky. So this is what we had before. We could put our elements in there. So we had like almost like little Flexbox components, which you put in a grid, and you could move it with the grid. But what we can do now is we can create an actual grid close to CSS Grid. So we're having these grid cells, as we saw them before. We can add our elements. We can make them overlap. We can use the areas, all you saw before. We can add padding. We can add margin. And then when we resize, they will work with that grid as well. The beauty is that you can now mix and match. So if your components are set up in Flexbox or in Grid, you can have a grid or you can have Flexbox. You can really just as in real life, like in a browser, you can put them one inside the other however you want. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting there. They're working on it. So this is just the first release, so be a little mindful about that. We have fixed values and we have auto, which again would be one fractional unit, but again we unfortunately don't have different fractional units to play with, which is it's a bit tedious. If you say, I want a tool that completely translates to Flexbox and CSS Grid, then I would recommend that you have a look at PenPot. It's a really fantastic tool. And what they did, they have Flex Layout and CSS Grid, which is much closer to the real thing. I think it's even completely free to use it. So in Grid, you can see that it uses fractional unit. It uses the same language, which is something I personally prefer. And then you can set up your grid and you see your grid lines. And so you're also starting to think more in how what a real grid looks like. Okay, so our project manager is back. We solved this. Let's see. Oh, we've got client feedback. I love client feedback. Let's go there. This doesn't even want to play the slide. Thank you for your work. After reviewing the design with my wife, and all my cousins, even second degree. We noticed the text doesn't adjust in size across devices. Could you please make this adjustment? PS, I've created a design in PowerPoint, so it should be very clear for you to implement. This is really great. I'm very happy that you're laughing, because I showed this to a class of students yesterday, and they were just sitting there like, what? And I was like, are you going to find out? So we're working on that as a team. And well, I feel you. I really do feel you. So, okay, let's have a look at this. Breakpoints. So how do we work with breakpoints? Development is quickly going to explain it. So breakpoint, as the name says, it's the point where our design breaks and we can change layout decisions. So in CSS, it looks something like this. It's a media query. It says at media and then min, max width, however you want to write that. There is a certain threshold that you put, and then in the curly brackets, it changes. I'm going to put some CSS here. I'm very embarrassed. There are way too many developers. So for the designers amongst you, this is a very great example I made, how you can change the screen size. So you call the media query, and then you can target a specific value, and then you can change it for that size. So here there's some grids in it. You don't really need it, but it used to be that you would change how the grid looks and works at these breakpoints, how things distribute. Things like changing a burger menu to a links menu. That is something you want to take care of. And then very important, typography. I'm going with Jason here tomorrow, so I'm very excited about hearing the talk more about typography. If you've been working with this a lot, if you're as old as me, in other words, then you've been working probably with Bootstrap. So in Bootstrap, what we had before, we were given those breakpoints, we were given a grid, and then we set up this grid in our design, and then we filled like we added our designs in there. But now with Flexbox and CSS Grid, we don't really need breakpoints, actually. We could sometimes get away without adding them at all. But you still do need them, I believe. Things like, as I mentioned, like a burger changing into links, like sometimes an entire component needs to change. And you can do incredibly arty stuff. So this is a page by Jen Simmons. She has a fantastic page here. Here's the link, labs@jensimmons.com. And there's fantastic examples where she took old Bauhaus posters and created websites with CSS Grid about them. She has fantastic tutorials around that as well. And so it's really becoming these little pieces of art, and every little detail, as you see, is like taken care of bit by bit. Now, in most of our everyday work, we probably don't do that. So we want to have a more systematic approach, and we might have some fixed breakpoints, especially to take care of something like typography. So we want to have a scale, and then we're working after that. There is a really beautiful feature that I love in CSS called clamp. So what clamp does, you set a minimum value, and then it resizes once it reaches a threshold, and then it's like clamped again to the maximum value. So your typography never gets too small or never too large. And the way it looks in CSS, it's like this. And then you have your min size, your max size, and then you have a rate of scale in between. So the viewport width, that's like a percentage of it. And this does not depend on breakpoints, because it's like a little closed system in itself, sort of kicking in. If you want to, I'm going to get there in a second. So we look at design. What's happening in design? So in design, we look at this and we're like, great, that's what we're doing. We can do that in Figma. We have our type scale. We have our styles. So we set up probably a frame per breakpoint. And then what we do, however, have where you're probably going to have some issues is when you have your components and then suddenly you're like, okay, I want to use that same component, but I have different typography on different breakpoints. Now, do I make a component per breakpoint, or how does that work? And that was really tricky before because we only had styles. Now, in Figma, we have styles and variables and modes. So what we can do, we can set this up in such a way that we have our frames, and if we drag our components on the different frames, they will automatically pull in the right mode with the right components, and they will alter the typography and pull in the right typography size for you. I have later on the link, if you're interested in that, there's a tutorial on that, because it's a little more complex. It's not perfect to set it up. It's a little tricky, but it does work quite well for that. Figma also launched Figma Sites. So Figma Sites is a little bit like Framer. It's like sort of where you can publish your own website. And in there, they presented a new way to use breakpoints in design. So it looks like this, that you have preset breakpoints. They have device naming. I'm not a big fan of that, but you can also customize it. And then what you have preset blocks, and you add them on your main, and then it's going to fill in the rest. So I'm really hoping that this might be something that we see in Figma design as well. It's really, really great, and you can work super fast. The way this works, you can set up your own components and libraries. So you can see you just pull over an instance of one component to the main, and then it's going to just populate the rest, and you have full control about how all of this looks. The way it works is you have desktop, tablets, and mobile. And then you're simply going to name your variants after these, so desktop, tablet, and mobile. And then when you pull one in, it's going to understand automatically to pull in the rest. So you could keep on designing on your components, and then it would just change all those instances. So you have the same setup as we have before, but it's just a little more organized, and it's communicating with one another. So I'm really hoping that we'll see that in Figma design. If you want to play with this, I made a little playground file about this, which you can connect with sites. There's free tutorials and everything. It's on my page. It's called moonblocks.io. It's also in the resources later on, so you can download that library and you can play with these setups. Now, in design, we cannot use clamp. We simply don't have that. So again, clamp is something that you would talk with your developer. There needs to be accessibility, needs to be considered. It's probably not the right solution for everything, but it's great if you have it at the back of your mind and can discuss if it's the right thing for a certain project. Okay, we're back in our Slack channel. Hi, everyone. Let's have a look what's happening now. Regarding responsive behavior, our new intern just sent me this TikTok video about container queries. Should we not be using those instead? I like the cool thing now. Yeah, so we're loving that one as well. So let's have a look. Container queries. I love container queries. I'm not sure if Miriam is in the room. There's someone here. There's Miriam. Yeah, she knows a lot about container queries, much more than I do. So I'm a little nervous explaining this in front of her. So here we go. Remember our media query? So our media query, that looked at the viewport, right? So we had the viewport, and then we do A, B, and C, and that's where it breaks. Now our container query, why it's so amazing, and it doesn't look at the viewport, it looks at where it is placed, so the container that holds your component. And the fantastic thing here is that we can have different the same component in different areas, which is absolutely amazing. And it looks perfect if you put it in the sidebar, if you put it on your content, so really amazing. So you literally send the threshold in that component, right? And then it's just going to look how much space it has. So here again, here's an example of a real page, and you can see it's the same component, and depending on how much space you give it, it's just always going to have the perfect distribution. Now in design, we don't have that. We don't even have proper breakpoints, so we have no container queries in Figma. But what you can do, there's a little hacky solution I use if I want to communicate it. So we can query in Figma, but we can set up responsive information. So here we have our component set, and I basically just sort of hack that component set, and I say min width, max width. And then what I do is I'm just going to set this up. So I just name the property at container. So that also means that if someone looks at that, they're going to be confused, and then you ask, and then you can have a little bit of documentation saying we're working with this new thing and we're just trying to communicate things here. And then you set your min max width. You can set a min and max width in Figma inside those components. And then when someone uses it, you pull it out, and then you can see that you have min and max. Now it doesn't activate automatically. You'd have to do it all manually. So it's more a communication thing that you could use it for, because in dev mode it will then show up. So client feedback, again, fantastic. So I think we're done. So thanks for your work, but can you make it pop more? Also, I think the logo should be bigger, and there is absolutely nothing I can do for you. And they lived happily ever after. But just 1 second before we finish, because I'm not done. So in my story, right, the designers and the developers, they lived in this great harmony, they loved each other, they had lots of time, but it might not be the case in everyday life. And what you should still do, or what I think you can do, is you can use cursor. Now, it always sounds a bit strange because when you look at cursor, then it just looks like this, and that doesn't make sense to a designer. But what you can do in cursor, you can use it on a super basic level. So if you do, I think it was really funny, I put this up like 2 years ago, and there were 3 people using cursor. Well, who knows cursor? I would expect almost everyone. For those who don't know, like cursor is basically a code editor, but it has an LLM, so a sort of ChatGPT thing integrated, and so you can talk to it. So you can talk to it like it's a very patient developer answering all your questions. And so what you can say is, you can just say, set up a page. Like, I just want a page, show me how to set up an HTML and CSS page. It's going to generate that for you. And then you can also pull over your Figma. It has a Figma connection now, but if you want to keep it a bit lo-fi and just play with it, and you can just put in your stuff and you can start playing with it. And then what you can do is you can ask it, can you tell me how to make a page responsive? And it's going to tell you about Flexbox. It's going to tell you about CSS Grid. It's going to highlight you areas. You can start typing. You can play around with these things. So even you might not end up with a super professional page. You can actually make pretty nice static pages as well there. But you're going to understand, and you're going to have a little playground. And so you can start understanding how these things work. And I think that's very valuable, because this way we can move away from the handing off to the understanding of. And I think we're also entering a really exciting phase where, as designers, we are entering the making of, and it's hopefully going to be a next talk. So I hope I made it worth your while to scan that code. You can also find it on moonlearning.io/layout. And I just want to say thank you so much for your attention. I really, really appreciate it. I think I'm waiting for Vitaly for the question.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Christina. I got lost. Sorry, everyone. So, off we go. We have a lot of questions.
Green sofa.
Sorry?
Very green sofa.
Yes, yes. Yes, yes. So, dear friends, just in case if you have any questions, of course, please do feel free to actually jump in and add questions in the Google Doc as well. And I'm going to bring up some. I think, for me, this is always a bit of a story, like actually design and developer collaboration and all. And I'm wondering, at which point would you recommend to actually jump into Cursor? So if you're, let's say, designing in Figma, and you kind of want to jump to prototype, what would be the good timing for that?
I mean, it depends a lot on your level of, if you if you feel comfortable with code, then I jump in there a little earlier to try out. As soon as I want to see how the page behaves,
right.
I jump into the browser. But everything else that's really like the design decisions on hierarchy, on colors, on components, I prefer doing that in Figma because I'm much faster. But if you come from a development background, you probably want to jump in there a little quicker, faster.
Do you find yourself at times kind of jumping into Cursor before you even jump into Figma?
Yeah, I mean, there's different projects. Now, if you're doing a client project, or if I do my own project, I use Cursor super basic. So I really just make static HTML and CSS pages with it if I need a landing page or something. And so if I do that, I usually make a super fast design in Figma. That I just have the colors, I know a little bit what I want to do, and then I jump into Cursor pretty fast and do most of the stuff there.
Right. But I'm also finding it quite interesting that you kind of hack around and kind of indicate the container queries in Figma. I'm also wondering if you have, let's say, to communicate things that, I don't know, let's say accessibility considerations or motion. How does that look like? How do you communicate it most effectively to a developer who is then implementing?
You're catching me there. It's not my subject. Oh. So accessibility, I think there's someone, Stephanie, here to talk about that. So I'm very glad. It is not my expertise, so I don't want to tell you wrong stuff.
I mean, just in general, any kind of things that, any kind of communication that you need to explain to developers.
Well, you maybe the specific.
It's kind of the specifics of the design. Maybe you had a particular idea in mind or something.
Yeah.
So because like throwing it over emails feels like...
No, I mean, I always stay in the Figma file. So I have like different areas in my Figma file. So I have areas where there's called playground or only design, and this is where I do all the work. And then I have different, I don't use dev mode like the developers will be in dev mode, but I just then move it up to a different page. I also, for example, have a different page for design and a different page for prototyping. I would always keep that separate. And then in prototyping, then what you say, their interactions and all of that, I would label, and I put a lot of sticky notes in there. I write a lot of stuff. I put links for examples, and I do the same with design.
Okay, makes sense. I think there was a question that just came in here in the Google Doc. I don't know if this is the right question for you, but how does Cursor compare to something that you maybe tried beyond that, like VS Code, GitHub Copilot, anything else? They can do the same thing, so why Cursor?
I mean, for me, it is because I am not a developer. It just, so I use VS Code, and then I write, and then error, and I Google, and I copy. And so for me, Cursor, it was just really easy because it's basically VS Code with a chat, with a box where you can talk to. So it just felt it had the lowest barrier of entry as a designer because it was very logic how to use it.
Makes sense. Well, this is always coming up in these kind of conversations. Christine? Tables in Figma. So what's the best way to build tables in Figma? I tried the new grid mode, but it's not very flexible. What do I do?
So, I mean, that's a whole talk, no tables. I still use Flex. I think Flex is just working better still in Figma right now. So the grid mode is, I think it's getting there, but it's still a bit tedious. There is a really cool thing. What you can do is, okay, rows or columns. I'm not going to get in there. That's like, try. I'm a row person, but
ooh,
I know, but I'm
dangerous territory.
I know. It's very hard in life, these discussions. So what you can do is you create a component of your first row or column, and then you create an instance. You combine those instances with an auto layout, and then you're getting something called a magic handle. If you all follow me on YouTube, LinkedIn, all my social media, then you're going to see all of that.
As you should.
Yeah, you should. And then you have a magic handle, and you can pull it out, and it's going to create all those rows for you. And if you type in, like, let's say you're having an office with a name, a location, it's going to pick up on that logic, and then it's going to also populate all of that for you automatically with data.
But there are also some plugins that I think are quite popular for kind of anything related to tables in Figma. I just don't remember exactly which ones, but it's a big topic.
It's a tricky one.
Yes. Well, this kind of really created a big conversation happening right here. So we have Akhil wondering if our developers are using different framework like MUI, how can we create a common language for token naming since they may have very different standards? So I guess the question is, if you have developers using different things and different tools, and you have a design that you kind of use and want to communicate, be it again tokens or anything else to different teams using different frameworks, how would the design that you're creating in Figma fit?
Yeah, so it doesn't. It's the bad news, but I think hopefully we're going to see some developments around this because there wasn't an update for quite a while. And it's something that people ask for all the time. So right now what you have Figma, and then you're having your Figma naming, which should be similar to your token naming, but you're just not going to probably have the same token naming. And then you can connect it with a JSON file if you want to know, if you want to use Token Studios. There's pros and cons, like you just have to try out if it works for your team. So some people say they're really happy connecting it. Others say we just have our Figma file, that's the intent. Then we have our JSON file, and from our JSON file, it just connects with anything that we need in code.
Okay. Chris is wondering, you had very good advice for designers to understand the development better, but do you have any advice for developers to understand more about Figma and the design process?
Yeah, and I love when developers come, especially when I do online courses and things. And a lot of the times developers come and they pick it up really fast because everything makes sense. It's based on development. So you know what a component is. You look at auto layout, and this is really hard to understand for designers, but you look at it and it makes total sense. And so actually developers are moving super fast in Figma, usually when they start learning it, so just take a course. And it's very funny because I also notice sometimes they get a bit insecure about, does it look good enough, and all of that side. So I think this is just a moment where then, designers are cute, fluffy dogs again.
Yeah, but I also think if you, I'm kind of curious, so when you when you have, let's say, a design ready, do you use then Cursor to explain to developers what you have in mind? Or would you show it around in Figma?
I mean, it depends. Like, I use Cursor more for like small stuff, and then you know when it goes a little bit into the, don't want to say vibe coding because I still think it's different. But if you're working on, you know, if you're working on a web app or something on huge projects, like you don't need to come with your little code file. It doesn't make sense. But you understand when you're handing this off, then you know where to put your energy. So I put my energy in, does the hierarchy work? Does the components work? Do my typography, my colors, like all of that, I can take control of all of that, and it can be really solid. So we have that out of the way. And then we can focus on things where it doesn't align, which is the behavior. And then we can start investing the time we have there. So we're very respectful as well of each other's time and not sort of inventing the wheel every time with a component.
Right. Well, this was just a matter of time. AI, Christy.
Yeah.
AI. With advancement in AI tools such as Cursor, will tools like Figma become obsolete in the nearest future? Question mark in bold.
I always love that people ask me this. I mean, I buy or sell shares if I knew, but
But I mean, looking at the bright future.
That
question is literally bold.
I know.
I mean, literally.
I don't know. I think they're gonna catch up and look very different, or they don't. I don't know that. I hope they do. I love Figma. I think they're a fantastic team and they have a great community. But I think we're gonna see, like, I always think that design tools that we're gonna use in 5 years, we can't even think of what they would look like.
Just thinking and that's it?
Maybe, I mean, I think design is actually the trickiest part because everything else is easier to do with AI. But design, you have this picture in your head and then you, like, if you work with Figma Make, so I tried to use Figma Make and I find it really frustrating, not because the tool is bad, but because I want it to look like what I have in my mind. And
but also explaining that thing in your mind. Like
yeah, it's very hard because it's like if I explain something to you, you're gonna look different when you design it. So I don't know what it's gonna look like, but I'm just very excited to see what happens. And I think it's a great time for designers because I think we're being more empowered to start building products. And it's not always the big corporates either. You might be like, I work on my own product, so it's small products and I run them by myself. So for me, I could not have done what I do now 5 years ago because I have all of these tools. So, you know, there is some stuff that's not going to work anymore, but there's other doors opening. And I think if you're curious and flexible, then you're going to find something. And if everything is bad, then at least you had a good time.
Yeah. And the final one, because we're running out of time here, do you have any wish lists of features that you think, if somebody from Figma is sitting here, maybe listening to, that would be really, really useful to have? Like, do you have a wish list of features?
They actually, the wish list I had, actually this config, I got lots of it confirmed. So right now, I think they're working on a CMS for Figma Sites. I'm really excited about Figma Sites. I really like it. And then I just wish that what you saw in the talk, that we don't have the same units. So I really want to have the fractional units, more flexibility so that I can get closer with that. And otherwise, I'm just excited what they come up with.
So the future does look bright.
I like the present and the future. So.
Excellent, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being with us,
Christine. Thank you so much for having me.
Insights.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine.